Today we celebrate an important milestone in the development of the university's National Death Penalty Archives, and we are very, very pleased you could join us. I'd like to recognize two special guests, Assemblyman Jack McEnany and Professor Michael Radley, who traveled here from the University of Colorado. The professor did. Jack just traveled from that. Our thanks to you both for joining us today. We are here to announce and celebrate the addition of a tremendously rich historical collection to our National Death Penalty Archive. The Espy collection consists of records of more than 15,000 executions carried out under capital punishment laws throughout this country's history. These records date back to colonial times, beginning in the early 1600s and continuing through the present. They include nearly 100 boxes of materials. Mr. Espy, who lives in the small town of Headland, Alabama, began developing his collection prior to 1970. At his own expense, he traveled great distances from town to town, courthouse to collect records of executions. He corresponded extensively with countless individuals. He clipped newspaper stories and magazine articles. He pieced together this collection slowly, laboriously, and meticulously. He did this because he believes that historians, scholars, and the public should have a record of how, why, and against whom the death penalty has been imposed. Whether you are for, against, or undecided about capital punishment, there is no disputing the importance and the tremendous historical significance of these records. Unfortunately, Mr. Espy is unable to join us today. He's quite ill, but we will be taping this event for him. We're thinking about him, and we wish him the very best. Mr. Espy's work is an important addition to the National Death Penalty Archive's already impressive collection of historical materials. No other repository in the nation rivals this archive in documenting the history of the death penalty in the United States. We are very proud of the Capital Punishment Research Initiative, the School of Criminal Justice, and the University Libraries for establishing and continuing to build the archive. It is a treasure trove of materials for researchers and anyone else interested in capital punishment. Thank you, Mr. Espy. Thanks to you all who have joined us here today, and thank you once again for supporting UAlbany. Let me now introduce Distinguished Teaching Professor Dr. James Acker from the university's #2 ranked in the nation School of Criminal Justice. Thank you.
Thank you, President Phillip. I'm substituting today for Dean Julie Horney, who, as I speak, is on her way to Germany, so she sends her best. There was an execution last night. Jesse James Cumming died by lethal injection for the murder of his 11-year-old niece, Melissa Moody. I suppose that we and future generations care about events like this and the death penalty generally because capital punishment raises so many profound issues of law, politics, morality that are fundamental to the American people and American society. And it's critically important that we have a record of executions, the who, what, why, and how that society punishes by death convicted offenders. And that is the real gift of the collection that we're celebrating today. Watt Espy, as President Phillip said, has truly devoted his life to commemorating for our generation and future generations so they can make a judgment about the justifications of capital punishment, this part of American history. It's a collection without rival. Its historical significance is unparalleled. We know it will yield future dissertations, books, insights about the death penalty, and we couldn't be more pleased and thankful to Watt Espy for his confidence in the National Death Penalty Archive and the University at Albany in allowing us to store his collection here so others can make use of it. An indispensable part of this collaboration has been Watt's very good friend, Michael Radlett, who has flown in this morning from Colorado to join us. Mike will be flying back out bright and early in the morning, and we really want to thank Mike for all of his help with our capital punishment research initiative here in Albany and in regard to this collection. I also want to thank Walt Francis, who is an alumnus, who coincidentally also lives in Colorado, for his very generous support to the Capital Punishment Research Initiative that helped make this event possible. Ann-Laura Del Cerro, who is right there and can't hide, has already graduated, but continues to donate hundreds of hours and has volunteered her time and effort in helping to organize these materials. And Diana Mancini from our School of Criminal Justice for her terrific work in helping to organize this event. So, and thank you all for coming and sharing this opportunity with us. And I want to introduce now the head of special collections of the University of Albany Libraries, Brian Keogh. And it's been terrific for the Capital Punishment Research Initiative and our school to be partnering with the university libraries in helping to build the National Death Penalty Archive. So Brian.
Well, thanks very much to Dr. Jim Acker. We at the University Libraries and the Department of Special Collections are very excited to bring in one of our newest and one of our most prominent collections in the department. The Espy papers, totaling nearly 100 boxes, reflect the work that Espy did for nearly 40 years in collecting documents and transcribing colonial newspapers, all in an effort to document every execution in the United States. I think the collection is sometimes referred to as the execution collection, and we're thrilled to have that with us. And the Espy papers really become one of the centerpiece collections of the National Death Penalty Archive. As Jim said, it's been a collaboration between the libraries and the School of Criminal Justice since about 2002. We're just delighted to have this collection. The faculty and students in special collections will continue in the future to maintain the preservation and the access of these records, so future generations of students, teachers, and scholars have access to these materials. And the collection not only documents those executed through documents and transcriptions, but it documents the very unique methods and the uniqueness of the man, Watt Espy. Academically untrained, spent many, many hours and personal resources in doing the work to document these executions. And this collection is really a tribute to him as well as to all the people he documented. So I want to thank you all for coming tonight. I want to thank all the people that were involved in bringing this collection here. And I also want to thank Watt Espy for not throwing the records away. Because we archivists encounter many people who don't see the value, both from a research perspective and from a perspective of documenting humans and events. That's what archives do. They're a lens into the past. So thank you again, Watt Espy, for saving all these records. We're very pleased, and the library is thrilled to have this new collection. I want to introduce Dr. Charles Lanier, who will come up and say a few words. Thanks very much.
Thank you. I'd be remiss tonight if I didn't start out talking about a couple of people that couldn't be here tonight. It was about a year ago that Norma Herrera traveled here to start her collection, establish a collection for her brother. I think you were here that night, Brian. She traveled here. Her brother was executed by the state of Texas. She came here to talk about her story in a book she'd written. I know there's some people here. Heather particularly was very friendly with her when she got here. She died about 4 months after she was here. So I want to remember Norma. The other person is another lady, Gail George. For those of you that remember, I think it was about 3 or 4 years ago, there was a play here, and some of the local colleges and the university hosted. I have to look to my notes because I can't remember this. Alice and Kafka Are Dead, Long Live the Rosenbergs. I should remember, but it's a little cumbersome. This was the Da Theater Group that came from Belgrade, Yugoslavia. And Gail brought him here. We became great friends. She was going to help us as time went on. She got sick, and she died several months ago in April of this year from cancer. So the two people that are both going to be missed. I just wanted to mention that. The CPRI, the Capital Punishment Research Initiative, quickly we have 3 missions, one of which is to start an archive and to save a lot of these papers that Brian just talked about. We did that. We started that a number of years ago. So that's one aspect of our mission, to save these papers. We've done it. We've brought a lot of collections here. The second part of our mission is to plan and conduct policy-related research and to help get other people spurring some research. And we've done that in a number of ways. We had a symposium here. 2006, we brought a lot of researchers in from around the nation, some of the nation's leading researchers. The Capital Jury Project, we may hear some more about that later when Bill Bowers gets up to talk. That's situated at the School of Criminal Justice now. And we also have a recent proposal to study the victims, the surviving family members of homicide victims. So we've sort of fulfilled that mission in a pretty good way as well. Also, we try to encourage scholarship and get this information out there, disseminate this information. We've done that in a variety of ways. Out of the symposium with all these scholars, we've asked them all to write a chapter. The book should be published in a couple of months. So we're getting this information out there about where research needs to go in the future. We also have an email listing we've established, contacts we've made of over 800 people around the nation. We've had a number of public forums here, some on victims, some on the death penalty in general. We've also buddied up with a lot of schools, Sage colleges. We have people working here from different schools, Sage College, Albany Law School, Vermont Law Schools. We've had a lot of ties with a lot of people, so we're helping a lot of people work on different projects. So we've done all these different things with our mission here, and most of it on a shoestring budget. The one thing we've never had is permanent funding, okay? We've done this on a volunteer. You heard Professor Acker talk about Ann Lohr, who's helped and put in numerous hours as a volunteer to help us with things. So that's the one thing we never had is funding. We got a few grants early on, a little bit of money here and there, some alumni would send us money, but we've never had this steady source of income. We've tried fundraising, but I'm not a fundraiser. Jim Acker's not a fundraiser. Bill's not a fundraiser. We call people, but we don't know. This isn't our vocation. So what do you do when you don't have money? You go to the government, and that brought me down to Assemblyman McEnany and some other people down in the state legislature. So I went down to see them, and he was a natural because he's a historian. We'll talk about in a second. A historian, a scholar. He's studied these things for years and talking about the death penalty. So he was a natural person to go see. He and other people down there were really welcoming about this initiative. They were pretty excited about it. This is great. I mean, a lot of people didn't know about it. A lot of people don't know some of the things we're doing. So he was very welcoming and encouraging, and I think a testament to that is he's here tonight to talk about this. I'm not going to say a whole lot about Assemblyman McEnany because his website is this long about his biography, so I want to hit just a couple of high points, but I tell you, you can say them if you want. I just don't know all these things. Go to the website and check it out. But some things that I found was pretty interesting. Albany County historian, you're a well-known teacher and speaker on local history, ethnicity, and related fields. You also served in the Peace Corps down in rural Colombia, South America, which I had no idea. You were in the Assembly for 12 years. Maybe it's an old biography. I thought you might have been there longer. 16. See, it's old. There's probably more in there. Authored nearly 90 bills which have been signed into law. He's also passed several laws encouraging high-tech development and job creation at the University Heights Consortium and the University of Albany. Okay, and that's part of your district, our university here today. So in part because he's a legislator, historian, scholar, somebody who's knowledgeable about these issues, he was a natural person for me to talk to. He's also a natural person to come, and he came here tonight to speak to us, so please welcome Assemblyman Jack McEnany.
President Phillip, distinguished members of the faculty, we have Judge Dugan here, a frequent Breakfast Club member on Saturday mornings. First of all, I'm glad that this is being filmed because I want to personally thank Watt Espy for a near lifetime of work of documenting something that needs desperately to be documented. The last time that the New York State Legislature, and I'll speak specifically of the State Assembly of which I'm a member, debated the death penalty was in 1995, and the administration had changed, and a governor who would always veto the death penalty, which passed both houses of the legislature, but didn't have enough for an override, Governor Cuomo, had passed from power, and the new governor, George Pataki, got the highest applause at his inaugural address, saying that if the legislature passes the death penalty again, I will sign the bill. first speech that I ever gave on the floor of the legislature, which was in 1993, was on the death penalty. And that was before we knew about DNA as we do today. And I know at that time, my opinion, which was anti, was not shared by most of my constituents, who have always been very forgiving, thank heavens. That debate started at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And before the reforms that we've had about going after midnight, that debate continued without a dinner break or a break of any kind until 4 o'clock the next morning. And the bill passed. It shows you how controversial this issue is. We think today we stereotype with Texas as celebrating the death penalty. Thanks to Watt Espy's work, I was looking at a chart over there by state, arranged by decades. There was a time when Texas was behind New York, and New York in a decade had some 400 and some executions to 250 more or less from Texas. So the feelings on the death penalty and how it is used from state to state and from era to era and from generation to generation are always fluid. They're always changing. And we need as much solid scholarship and as many primary sources as we can get to really understand this issue. Of all the legislative issues that anyone deals with, it would be hard to think of anything that has less emotion involved in it, or anything that is more literally a matter of life and death. So Watt Espy, what you have provided here to these archives in the state university libraries will benefit scholars and lawmakers and law students and people who really care about this very important human issue. Will benefit them for years and for generations to come. Thank you so much for your stewardship in making sure that these records will take on a life of their own to serve the future. Thank you so much, Watt Espy.
Next up, I want to talk for a minute about a person who's come here from Colorado, a person who's integral in making this collection, allowing this collection to come here to the University of Albany. That's Professor Michael Rattler. Last summer, in summer of 2007, Mike and I exchanged an email, and we had talked for a number of years about going down to see Watt and doing an oral history. That's one of the projects that we've also started, and there's a lot of oral history interviews as part of the National Death Penalty Archive as well. And we exchanged an email. Mike said he was going down in September of last year to see Watt. I said, geez, now's the time. We got to go down and see him. So I talked to Jim Acker and said, look, let's go down. Let's get our schedules coordinated with Mike. Let's go down to Alabama. So we did. We took Sheila McLean with us from Night Owl Entertainment. They're the ones that did a lot of filming for us, and they filmed a bunch of oral history interviews. So Sheila came with us, and the three of us took off down to Alabama, met Mike in Headland, and went to see Watt. We did the interview. During the interview, at one point, Mike talked to Watt, and Watt expressed his desire that his papers come up here to the National Death Penalty Archive. So we knew at that point that Watt wanted his papers here. We were thrilled, of course. The main thing to us, we got the interview. We wanted to hear Watt's words right on tape. So he says he wants to do it, so the next thing is we have to go down and get him. All we know, and I don't know if you'd seen them at the time, Mike, for years, but all we knew is that they were in a storage locker someplace. This is an area that Hurricane Katrina, I think, touched on last time it went through there. So we wanted to get these things. We didn't want to lose these. So we went down and we made another trip, which I'll talk about later. But we went down in January. Mike went down, Margaret Vandiver went down, and a lady from Florida drove up, Terry Farley Walsh drove up. We said, okay, we're going to go down for a couple days, get this material, which we've preserved for posterity with some of the photographs down there. They're piled high in a big storage locker, just boxes and boxes. Ann saw them all, as we talked about. She was up here and had to process them. When she saw them, they were in boxes, big boxes, little boxes, shopping bags, critters in there, everything. It was unbelievable. So we spent a couple days pulling all these things out, organizing them. Watt came with us. We put him in the car. We brought him over to the storage, and he sat there with us. We got his wheelchair. Sat there as we went through everything. Every single book, and I think I read in the paper something, there's 1,000 books. I don't know how many, but Watt went through every single one of those, plus probably another 1,000, every single title, and said, this I'm going to keep for now, this one can go, this one can go, this one I'm going to keep, this one on for 2 days. We got all his papers, boxed them up. I don't know where the 100 boxes came from. I loaded and brought back 132 boxes. We had to go to Staples a dozen times to get all the material to do this. So anyway, we went down, we got all the boxes, brought them up here, and preserved them. So we had a great time. And we're happy they're here. So that's the story of how we maybe Mike will get into that, some more of the details of what happened down there. Mike Morales, professor and chair, Department of Sociology, the University of Colorado at Boulder. He's also one of the original advisory board members for the CPRI. His research focuses on capital punishment and especially the problems of people that are convicted, that are innocent, erroneous convictions. One of those books he wrote was co-authored by another board member, Hugo Bedeau, and also Constance Putnam. The book was published in 1987. It's called In Spite of Innocence, Erroneous Convictions in Capital Cases. Mike, you don't even know this, but there's only 3 copies left at Amazon. I went yesterday to look, so there's only 3 left. So if anybody wants them, they should get them quick.
They only published 5.
Okay, so there's 3 left. Get them while they're Mike has testified in approximately 100 death penalty trials around the nation. He's also a member of the board of directors of Families of Homicide Victims and Missing Persons, a Colorado group of families of homicide victims in cases in which the homicide has never been solved. With great pleasure, I introduce our friend and board member, Mike Rattle.
Thank you, Charlie, and Jim, President Phillip, Representative McEnany. It's a real honor to be out here tonight as we all honor a person who I'm proud to call one of my closest friends and really one of my all-time heroes, and that's Watt Espy. I want to talk to you just for a few minutes about who this person is. A very distinguished scholar, one of the most scrupulous scholars I've ever met in my life. I've been in the academy now for too long, many, many years. He is more meticulous than most university professors who I've met. He developed the methodology to document these executions just by sitting down and doing it, teaching himself. And he becomes now, by any measure, America's most distinguished death penalty historian. I can't tell you much about Headland. This should be really a topic for the anthropology department. I'm a Michigander, and going down to Headland, which is in southeast Alabama, it's an area different than any area I had ever been in. And who would have thought that an area like that would have produced Watt Espy? His father was the president of the bank. He was born in Dothan, about 7 miles from Headland, and he lived almost his entire life there. He was decorated for his service in the U.S. Navy during the Korean War in Morocco, then went back to Headland. He spent 2 years at the University of Alabama and decided that college was not for him and went back to Headland to run his work in his family store. He then sold encyclopedias, he sold cemetery plots, he traveled around a lot in southern Alabama and Georgia, but was quite interested in crime stuff, and he would stop in local libraries to read crime magazines and keep up with especially the death penalty. And along about 1970, he decided that he was going to try to document every execution in American history. He didn't realize that people didn't have that. He figured you could just call up the library and somebody would say, oh yes, we have all those records, right here. And the more he got into it, the more he realized how much about this that we did not know. So one of the things that he did was to document executions of slaves. And it turns out that for many years, the number of slaves executed was lower than one might think. And the reason why is because slaves had monetary value. So if an owner had a slave who was getting in trouble, the owner would rather sell the slave literally downriver or to the Caribbean so that the slave would not be executed and the owner would be able to get back some of the economic investment. So consequently, every state in the former Confederacy ended up passing a law that would compensate slave owners if their slave was executed. It's under the same theory that if they build a road in your backyard, they have to pay you for the property. So because of this, though, we now can go, and Watt has gone, to all of the state capitals of the former Confederacy and dug out records of the state treasury department. And sure enough, you'll see, if you go down to Tallahassee, you'll dig out in 1854 the treasury report. It'll say something like, paid to Colonel John Taylor of Jacksonville, the sum of $400 for the execution of slave Bill, and it'll give the date of the payout. Now, we don't know what Bill did. We don't know even when he was hanged. We do know the date of the payout, and that's the only record now that we have of that execution. In Florida, they paid half the market value of a slave. So that was one of the things that Watt learned about, and we've now got those records here. And they started to write to people from all over the country, including Bill Bowers, who will speak here in a minute. Bill's seminal 1974 book on the death penalty in the United States included a list of legal executions. And Watt wrote him, I don't know, Bill, you can tell the story, I don't know if the first letter he wrote, but one of those letters said, "Dear Professor Bowers, I found a couple thousand errors in what you published." I'm sure Bill thought, who is this guy? What is going on here? And then later to find out that Watt was right. I've never found an error in anything that he's done. Another person he wrote to, and a person who we really need to remember and honor tonight, was the then director of the Capital Punishment Project for the ACLU in New York City, Henry Schwarzschild. And Henry, who himself, one of probably the person who's contributed more to death penalty abolition in the last half of the 20th century than anybody else who ever lived, started wondering, who is this guy from Alabama who keeps writing me these letters asking me about executions in Mississippi in 1830? I mean, I don't know. So Henry went down there to Headland and met Watt. Henry Schwarzschild and Watt Espy are about the two most different people I've ever met in my life. The southern Alabama native who speaks the Queen's English, he gets his who's and who's right with that heavy southern drawl. Henry Schwarzschild, refugee from Nazi Germany, and they hit it off like brothers. And Henry Schwarzschild was the one who made Watt's work possible. And so tonight with this collection, we also honor Henry's memory. He died in 1995. So Henry started to write friends at the University of Alabama in Tuscaloosa, and through Henry's intervention, Watt was offered a position as a clerk in the law library there in 1977. He moved up with the collection to Tuscaloosa, and between 1977 and 1985, he worked in Tuscaloosa, supported by the law library there, continuing his work documenting executions. The university got a National Science Foundation grant, and actually a 2-year grant. As things turned out, though, after 1 year, Watt was disappointed about the way that there were some coding problems. Indeed, we later found about a 10% error rate in the way that it was being coded through a story that I will not get into. But nonetheless, Watt decided that he did not like the way that people were making mistakes. And this scholar, this person who was so careful, just couldn't stand the thought of there being from his collection, a 20th century burning at the stake or a 17th century electrocution. So he decided to go back to Headland. Back in Headland, Watt lived in a weather-beaten house in, I'd say downtown Headland, but there's no stop signs really, in one of the main corners in town. A true fire zone. It didn't have very good electricity, so it wasn't air conditioned. So in the summers, Watt would work often all day in his pajamas with the drapes drawn, sitting there with his manual typewriter, smoking cigarettes with the ashes falling wherever they might, joined by hundreds of friends. The cockroaches that are so prevalent in that area didn't bother him, a true scholar at work. And he'd work often till the wee hours of the morning. I remember one time he called me in the middle of the night. He had discovered a case where a sheriff had hanged a dead body. It was a public execution. The guy had committed suicide the night before, and the question was, the crowd was coming to town, they needed an execution. The sheriff got on one side of the guy, and the priest on the other side. They strapped him to a board and hanged a dead body. I asked Watt about that earlier this year, and he didn't really remember it. The reason why I didn't remember it is because that night when we were talking, we decided it wasn't a legal execution. The guy was already dead. It was a suicide. So, that one he now couldn't remember the details, but he was all upset. Let's see, do we count this one or don't? Only the way that a true scholar would. I went up there one time just to give an example of some projects that can be done with this. The Espy family owns a pond about 10 miles or so out of Headland, and I went up there for a week and went through 15,000 records with Watt, and out of those 15,000 cases, we discovered 30 cases, 30 out of 15,000, where a white person had been executed for killing a black. And then Watt had a lot of information about those cases. I did further research and put it all back into the collection. But if that's not one example of racism in the administration of the death penalty, I don't know what would be. So Watt, like Charlie, unfortunately labored in poverty. I hope your house is a little better than Watt's. He really, to people in Headland, must have been the Boo Radley from To Kill a Mockingbird. I'll bet at Halloween kids would dare each other to go up and ring the doorbell. And there's a picture here from him in the New York Times where the living room of this house was Watt's office, and it was decorated by a couple hundred pictures of executed inmates. And Watt always loves to tell stories. His mind today is as sharp as ever. We just talked to him at 5 o'clock on the phone, and you know his mind is in great shape. But Watt would come in and welcome visitors and start telling stories of these people who were executed. One of his favorites, he told me quite often, was a college professor, I think from Ohio State, who was carrying on with a student. They killed the professor's wife, allegedly. He's probably innocent, but nonetheless, Watt says, "Now, Mark, this ought to teach you a lesson. You know, don't do anything like that." Just really, really wonderful stories that Watt would tell. In the mid-90s, his health began to deteriorate with diabetes, and by 2000, he was pretty much bedridden, where he remains today. His family has rented or purchased a more modern home for him down the street in Headland, but he's confined to bed. When Charlie and I were down there, it really does take two people to lift him out and put him in a wheelchair, but to talk to him on the phone is a real treat, and I continue to talk to him pretty much every week on the phone just to see what's going on. He loves politics. Tonight is the big debate. He'll be, he's not a betting man, but he thinks McCain will win in a landslide. You know, he lives in Alabama, so we shall see how that goes. I might mention that when Watt came back to Headland, there were some efforts at that time that we went through to locate the collection in the university. For example, we approached Tuskegee. I, at the time, was a professor at the University of Florida and went back to Gainesville in hopes of bringing the collection to Gainesville. And one of the people who I talked to there who immediately saw the importance of this collection was my friend, professor of history at the University of Florida, Kermit Hall, who later became the president here at Albany. And until his death, Kermit learned about this collection, knew about this collection, and was certainly one of the early people to recognize its value. So in sum, I think we do many things tonight. We remember people like Henry Schwarzschild. We honor certainly Watt Espy, his tremendous work, and now it's finally found a home that will not suffer from hurricanes or vandals or fire or God knows what. And it's the weather in this library is a lot nicer than the weather in Headland, Alabama. Let me tell you that. But it also, I think, gives us an opportunity to recommit ourselves as scholars to find some permanent funding for the Capital Punishment Research Initiative. This is something that Jim and Charlie have been carrying on their own, basically, with support as it is possible from the university. But these are not great days in New York for lots of extra change coming down the pipe. And the result is now the project is largely unfunded. So what we need to do, what I need to do, Bill Bowers needs to do, and Jim, is to find some way that we can get some kind of regular, permanent funding for this work to go on. Because the true thing that brings us on all together tonight is not only the stories, not only the stuff that's physically here, but I hope we can all make a commitment that we will be able to archive this stuff in a way that builds around a larger capital punishment research project that will attract scholars from around the world to Albany for future generations to learn more about this particular chapter of American history. So thanks to all for housing this and making this possible.
If anybody wants to see Watt's home, it's on here. It's part of the DVD, which I know, Brian, you want to keep this here? This was from the oral history that we did. Jeff Knight, who does the filming, just had stopped in here. He couldn't get here earlier. So that was the DVD. The final speaker this evening is Bill Bowers, who we've heard mentioned a couple times already tonight. Bill Bauer is a senior research associate at the Capital Punishment Research Initiative. He's an advisory board member. Officially, more unofficially, he's been pretty integral in everything we've done the last 4 or 5 years. I can't tell you how many three-way phone calls we've had over the last couple of years for hours on end. So Bill's a big part of what we've done here. Mike mentioned some books that he's written. He's also co-author of a new book entitled The Future of the Death Penalty in America. He's also the head of the National Science Foundation funded Capital Jury Project. Has over 40 published articles. The whole project, not Bill, well, Bill probably does too, but this project has over 40 published articles, 10 dissertations, I think 2 books now, been cited by the Supreme Court, a number of other courts. It's also been cited by the New York State Court of Appeals in 2004 and the decision that found New York State's death penalty unconstitutional. He's testified on death penalty legislation before committees in Congress, in front of the New York and Massachusetts legislatures. In the year 2000, he was the recipient of the August Vollmer Award of the American Society of Criminology. Regarding Watt's papers, let me just tell you a second about this trip we took, another trip we took down to Alabama. When we went there in September, where we did the original interview with Mike and Sheila McLean, we decided that, gee, ASC is coming up in 2 months, American Society of Criminology meeting in Atlanta, Georgia. It's not that far, 3.5 hours by car. You know what? I said, I want to come back over and see Watt. You know, I had a great time with him. He seems like the kind of guy you know forever. Once you meet him, you feel like you've known him forever. So we're talking, and I said, I want to go. And Bill said, well, I want to go too. So we was talking about it, and Margaret somehow, I forget how Margaret heard about it, but Margaret says, well, I want to go too. So we packed up at the ASC, I think it was Friday after some of the panels, took off, rented a car, took off, went down to Alabama to see Watt. At this time, Watt wants to send his papers here, so we took down a memorandum of understanding that he'd transfer the papers to the university libraries. We needed a notary. So Mike arranged that with a local attorney down there who knew Watt. He was going to shoot over quick because on Saturday we all had flights coming back to New York. We're going to shoot down quick, speak with Watt in the morning. He doesn't get up too early, so we got this little window of time where we can go and see him. We're going to go visit him, talk to him, do some more taping. The lawyer's going to run over, meet us quick. We're going to get the paper signed, and we're out of that. We're going back to Atlanta. We'll get the car back, get on our flights ahead of time. We'll be all set. So we go down. We get about 40 minutes outside of Headland, and we spend the night in a little town called Eufaula. I think that's how you say it. I always get corrected on stuff down there. So we go in, we have dinner, we go to bed that night. About 4 o'clock in the morning, there's no noise, nothing. It's very quiet, and all of a sudden I hear, and I'm going to sanitize this because I have 2 kids at home, 2 young children. In the middle of the night, I hear, about 4 o'clock, I hear, Charlie, holy poopy. We're in a different time zone down here. So 4 o'clock in the morning, Bill wakes up. He starts, God, we're in the wrong time zone. You know, so we put the lights on, we get ready. We're frantic now. We call Margaret. Jump in the car. All our plans are out the window. We're an hour behind. We didn't realize that we crossed into another time zone right before we got down to Headland. So we jump in the car. Everything gets set. And to make a long story short, we made it, and we got back on time. This illustrates what many of you who know Bill. Bill's mind never stops. It's always churning whenever you talk to him. You raise anything, and he's off to the races with it. This is Bill Bowers, our dear friend, who's going to speak to us now. Bill?
Thank you, Charlie, and President Phillip and Representative McNinney. It's a pleasure to be with all of you and to have this chance to celebrate Watt Espy, a remarkable American character. Mike Brevet has done a wonderful job of sketching you a picture of who this man is. And I'm not going to take very much time at all because I've actually only met Watt twice, though I feel like I've known him quite well for 30 years. He's somebody I talk to on the phone a lot, especially at a certain point in my work. Mike mentioned that Watt helped me out by discovering a couple thousand mistakes in an inventory of executions. In 1971, I sent someone to the library to look for a listing of executions in America because I wanted to study. I was then very interested in the issue of deterrence, and I wanted to find out, I wanted to know better about individual executions. All this had been done with rates and so on and so forth. I wondered if we couldn't find executions with dates, and we could begin to relate that to fluctuations in homicides. And so anyway, the student went to the library and came back, sure enough, with a listing of executions that had been read into the congressional record. This is a Japanese graduate student. I don't know how she found it, this was the days before Google or most of the celebrated search engines, etc. Anyway, she brought it back, and we sat down with this list. My colleague who's a collaborator with me and with Mike, Glenn Pierce, another graduate student then, and we opened this list, and you could see the first, they had a column labeled W or N for Negro or white or Negro. And the first page was Alabama. And you look down the list, and it was phenomenal to see the number of N's on the list. And we kind of assembled around each other. I started saying, I bet you there's a lot of evidence of racial bias in this stuff. We turned from page to page, and we kind of decided on the spot to abandon the work we had underway for a few months. Computerized this list that had the defendant's name, age at execution, whether there were appeals, and race, of course, county of prosecution, and that may be about it. Not too much. Anyway, we knew, that the Supreme Court was at that very moment reviewing and considering the case of Furman v. Georgia, which was the Supreme Court decision ended up deciding in 1972 in June that the death penalty as it was being administered in America was arbitrary, discriminatory, and cruel and unusual, a violation of the Constitution. We computerized the data. I wrote up a report, sent it to the Supreme Court. This is before I had any I was at that point a sociologist, had no contact with, and I think we sort of knew that this really wouldn't be the appropriate way to get evidence into the Supreme Court, but on the other side we thought, maybe having it in, we could get it to the newspapers. Somehow or other, this evidence of racial disparities. The evidence showed, in fact, that blacks were executed younger than whites, more often without appeals, and for lesser crimes. That is to say, first-degree burglary, which is going into a white person's house after dark, I think, was explained. But anyway, let me get Watt back into the picture. We ended up, because the death penalty was not abandoned for good or abolished by the Supreme Court forever and a day or forever, but could be possibly, as it turns out, and was reinstituted in 1976. I went forward with this and published this book, Executions in America, and made an appendix of this list. And that's what provoked, as Mike has related, my encounter with Watt, who explained that the list was faulty. And here I had conducted all this research and published these statistics. Maybe, it's a couple hundred pages, and then the appendix was another 200 pages, and then 400-page book. Watt agreed to provide the corrections that I would need to correct the listing. And I realized that we could enter the corrections, redo the analysis, and my experience was also the fact that in statistical analysis of these sorts, most of the time you don't, the results hold up. As it turned out, I published a book another 10 years later in 1984 with the new listing. Most of Watt's corrections, fortunately, had to do with the spelling of names and some of the counties and locations and things. Not too much with the race issue, but over that period of time, I got to know Watt, and we became friends. His tribulations with the University of Alabama, with the National Science Foundation, funding to have his data transformed into modern electronic format, these were source of tremendous aggravation for him. I would get calls sometimes after midnight. I don't think Watt was really sober some of these times. But we got to know each other and really formed a bond of tremendous friendship. And all the things Mike just said about this man's integrity is truly remarkable. He is a classic American character, and I thought more about that. So there are probably people, it's not restricted to America, there are people from monks who worked to copy manuscripts, people who've developed dictionaries. There's a breed or brand of people who have instincts like Watt has and who've made tremendous contributions. I read recently a biography of Mark Twain. I thought about Mark Twain and some of the history of him being in newspaper work and that, investigative work of that nature. And also thought of him because of his sort of a capacity to draw out American characters. Let me conclude. And by the way, as Mike, I think you mentioned, and anyway, both Mike and I were on the phone with Watt. I think you said 5 o'clock. We talked to him, and that, hearing his voice, his we'd call it a Southern accent up here, but it's the way he talks and the way they talk there. Anyway, this archive of data is a rich source, and I just want that will serve dissertations, books, the history. My work was on the death penalty from the Civil War to the 1960s, and it is true, as Representative McEnany says, in that period, New York had more executions than Texas or anybody, for a variety of reasons. It had to do with the immigration of people to New York State and so on and so forth. But my concluding comment is that we need someone to write a biography of Watt Espy, and I don't know who it would be, but I hope it can be done while he's still around to be talked to. Anyway, thank you very much.
Just have a few more things I want to say here. Number one, I want to thank people again. Anne-Laure Del Cerro, who's worked with us, put in a lot of hours. Anne comes from Paris, France. She's been here, a student at the university for a while. Talks with a French accent. Watt, as we've heard, has a pretty heavy Southern accent. So one day Anne says, I got some questions about some of these papers I'm going through. Can I talk to Watt? And I'm saying, well, I'll get you the number. I don't know, I don't know if I could be there, but she did talk to him. I think everything went well, right? You had a good conversation with him, so that was good. I also want to thank Jim Acker for one, because the last week and a half I haven't been around. Jim's really put all this together tonight in terms of celebration program and all that stuff, so I thank Jim for that. And he worked with Diana Mancini, who Diana's still here. Diana's helped us in any number of ways, including a lot of the efforts here tonight, so I want to make sure we recognize her as well. We have Watt's papers here tonight. We have a lot of collections we've received. They're out here, they're on the web. Brian's already got them on the shelf, but there's a lot more that are in processing. I think you have some more up here. I know I got a half a dozen in my office. A dozen boxes arrived today from Lee Beenan out in Northwestern School of Law, I believe it is, out in Chicago. These are papers and data that has to do with the New Jersey proportionality study back in, anybody remember offhand? 1984 to 1991, so there's quite a few papers there. Heard from somebody else, Equal Justice USA has sent us papers. We've received correspondent boxes of papers from some people in California that have dealt for many, many years with a death row prisoner. So these things keep coming. People keep calling us and they keep sending us. We make new friends. I got an email the other day from somebody out in Texas. They have an oral history project out there with the same type of thing we're doing here with our oral history, and they're doing it in the state of Texas, whereas we do it wherever funding, as far as funding will take us. So in short, the National Death Penalty Archive continues to grow, and this is something we're still working on continually. These examples give you a sense of some of the relationships. We've developed relationships, and I mentioned before, 800 emails. People all around the country, all around the world. We had this symposium, we had people here from England that traveled over for this. So we've done a lot in the time without a large amount of funding. We've done a lot reaching out to people and trying to build this, what we think is a pretty important initiative, not just the archive, but the Capital Punishment Research Initiative itself. 2 years ago at the symposium in this very room, just about 2 years ago, Scott Christensen, who's a local author and a graduate of our school, said, and I quote, "The National Death Penalty Archive constitutes the greatest body of evidence ever collected about the death penalty in the United States. I think it will have an enormous impact on public understanding about the ultimate punishment here. Questions still abound about the fairness and equity of the death penalty. Jim mentioned earlier somebody was just executed the other day. So this collection alone of Watt, I think, exemplifies what Scott was talking about. This alone is one of the greatest bodies of evidence that anybody's ever collected about the death penalty. I think back about the accomplishment of this very friendly, warm guy, welcoming person, unassuming, the years of work and sacrifice he put in. And I said, this is something that we really ought to preserve. We have to. That's why we have it here. And that was one of the great reasons we went down to get this stuff, not just to have it, but to preserve it. This is an important part of history. So these efforts, Watt's efforts, have laid the foundation for another generation of scholars to do some of this work. It's our goal then to preserve and to organize these papers and these things so that someone, either from this university or elsewhere, can come here and, to paraphrase Watt, to pick up where he left off. That's one of his greatest wishes, that this work continues, it doesn't stop with his inability to continue further. Everybody, thank you very much for attending this evening. We wish you all a safe trip home. I'm sure we're all headed for the TVs at 9 o'clock. I will be. So everybody have a safe trip, and thank you very much for coming and honoring us.
This is
Yes.